John, thank you very much for being here today. You have a very extensive career taking care of the residential sector in different corporations. Now you are with Invesco for the last over 10 years, I suppose?
10 years plus, yeah.
Yes. If you can, just for those that are not familiar with Invesco and your role, can you just tell us a little bit more, please?
Sure. I work in the alternatives team with my colleague David Kellett, and I suppose our role is to enhance and grow our bed strategy across Europe, specifically in the residential space. Over the last, it's now 11 years actually, so time does fly when you're enjoying yourself.
Wow.
We've invested about $3.5 billion into residential investments across about 11 countries, ranging from, we've snuck in some PBSA in there, but predominantly developed core residential for rent in a variety of markets.
And while we see some investors losing their sleep over the office portfolio, when it comes to the resi market, the situation is completely different, if I'm not mistaken. Where do you see the opportunities?
I think in terms of opportunities in the residential space, there's a fundamental housing problem in pretty much every country across Europe. Supply-demand, supply population growth, either through natural birth rates or inward immigration, leading to a shortage of supply of housing, and a massive shortfall in housing in the majority of European countries. Yesterday I was in a talk with Gavin Barwell, former advisor to the Conservative Party. We talked extensively about the housing problem in the UK, and then in the afternoon talking with one of the broker advisors about Poland. Exactly the same story. So if you look across that sort of panacea of markets, there's this massive pressure both in terms of owner occupation and also rental properties. And I think what's been really interesting is to see how in some markets occupiers have changed the way they look at residential. Spain is a great example, where in Spain historically it was all about owner occupation. Now you're seeing younger generations happy to rent, and a growing PRS, build to rent, multifamily, how you like to call it, market in Spain, with Neinor and others producing great opportunities. So I think the big difference is, that fundamental thing of people need somewhere to live hasn't changed. But potentially, if you look at offices, people do need somewhere to work, but more and more people are spending less and less time in the office. And so actually it's more about a flight to grade A space in offices, in our view. And therefore, from that perspective, you're seeing everything reverting back to core in the office space, best in class, and that ability to drive returns out of best-in-class offices. So I don't think the offices have gone away forever. I think if you're overweight to office, you maybe are having a little less sleep than perhaps if you're overweight to residential. But fundamentally, we're still we have a value add strategy in offices as well. So we're not out office.
Absolutely no, and I want to talk more about residential with you. And there are different trends. The consumer is changing. The interest rate as well made it difficult for people or made it more difficult for new buyers to buy their own property, so they're renting. So there are a lot of changes in the market space right now. But is there any trend that you can see in the resi market here in Europe?
I think the biggest trend in my mind is the creation of institutional grade stock and quality stock across Europe. If you look at historically, in a lot of markets, it was private investors buying smaller projects, maybe even one or two apartments in their own right, and the quality of that is perhaps not as good as institutionally owned and managed. And if you think about also the student world, where people are moving away from home, so home is always fabulous, mum and dad are always perfect, of course, but you move away, you go to university, more and more purpose-built student halls, Wi-Fi works, hot and cold water works, aircon or heating works depending on where you are. And you want to then move, when you move out of the university world, into accommodation that looks like that or feels like that. And what we're starting to see is people demanding more, your tenants, your customers, demanding more from you as a landlord. And so that sort of provision of service, that quality of opportunity, it doesn't have to be super 5-star. It just means that when something breaks, there's someone there who fixes it quickly. And if you have a problem, someone comes to you quickly. So it's provision of service. It's more of an operational business, I think, now than it ever was. So you're seeing the sort of the investors and the operators, and indeed our tenants, all demanding more from an operational perspective. So I think that's been the biggest change that I've seen over the last few years.
John, do you see any challenges, coming towards to you? Something that you should avoid, something that keep you up at night?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always challenges in anything you're doing, but I think at the moment, if you're looking at creating Grade A stock, we've seen massive construction cost increases, so that has made a number of schemes unviable. Also, obviously, if you're using leverage, the cost of debt has gone up, hopefully coming down. Expectations are there. One of my guilty pleasures is looking at a website of the forward curve every day, and it's stubbornly staying up there. But fundamentally, cost of debt, construction costs make projects more challenging. And then I think it's there's lots of talk about rent regulation. I think rent regulation can be a good and a bad thing. We already have investments in a number of quite highly regulated markets, and it's not a problem. It's when governments bring in something that you weren't expecting. Sweden, as a great example, where the government brought in a level of rent caps that effectively reduced your ability to increase rents by 50%. Just suddenly, that's a challenge. In Scotland at the moment, the government there is looking to bring in rent regulation there, where rents can only increase from a particular point by, I think it's 2% per annum in perpetuity, so no reversion to market. That makes it much more challenging. So I suppose those to me are the things where when politicians do things, they don't necessarily always think about the ultimate consequences. And with so many elections coming through in Europe this year, the surprise one in France, obviously the one that we all know about in the UK, who knows what will come out of those.
And recently Barcelona has announced as well that they will not allow short-term rental anymore until 2028.
Yep.
They will end that, and we see more and more of that happening. Of course, I understand the reasons, but I agree with you. And when we look at experiences where governments got really involved and regulated heavily, we see that things got worse, actually. Yep. You as an investor, if you had to suggest a direction, what would that be? What would be the right solution here? Would you suggest governments to be more active in terms of allowing developments, being faster in terms of approvals? What would be the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great point in terms of the planning, the zoning, permitting process. The time it takes and the cost associated with bringing a project forward has escalated enormously. Historically, you could probably back in a while ago come in almost with that and get your permit. Now, you'd probably have to fill this room with boxes full of paper to get the same permit for the same project. So I think smoothing of the planning process and that whole permitting process, and in some countries it's a case that you get your zoning and then off you go. But in other countries it's obviously that you get your zoning, but then you need your construction permit. And I remember an occasion when we were developing some houses in Madrid for an opportunistic fund. Time is money. And there we had the zoning, and I went, I think it was 18 months after the property had been acquired, and it was still bare land. And I said to my colleague Fernando, ¿Por qué? Why? And he said, well, because the municipality takes its time to give you the permit. And to me, if governments or municipalities want to free up the system, then zoning is an easy win. It takes legislation potentially in certain countries, but fundamentally I think that's a really easy win for people to bring forward. I think on the flip side, where countries have brought in rent control, I think politically it's going to be really challenging for them to row back. You're now a tenant. You know that your rent's only going to be increased by 2% per annum. You can factor that into your lifestyle. If the government comes back to you and says, we're going to change that now and it's going to be free market again, you're not going to be particularly happy with the government. And politics is all about power and staying in power. So for me, I think where rent controls exist, and Spain is another example where you've obviously had the rent controls, some talk about it being released, but hasn't happened yet as far as I'm aware. And the Barcelona point, I think I actually saw the same announcement, and I said to my colleague, must be good for hotels then, because I think if you have hotels, as we do, then actually short-term stays is what they provide. So actually it could be happy days.
Correct. John, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.